Welcome to Don't Retire, Graduate, the podcast that asks you what you want to be when you grow up so you can graduate into retirement with purpose and with passion. I'm your host and valedictorian, Eric Brotman, and this is the 6th season of our show. Every other Thursday, we'll be bringing you interviews with amazing guests, and on alternating weeks, we're hosting our Diary of a Financial Advisor segment where we interview financial advisors about their professional journeys and their passion for helping others to succeed. Please take a moment, if you haven't already, to subscribe so you never miss an episode of the show. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Matt Paradise. I think you're going to love Matt's story. Matt's a financial wellness speaker for young professionals, an award-winning author, and a living example of resilience. Once a homeless teen, Matt became a self-made millionaire and now helps organizations reduce employee money stress to unlock greater focus, productivity, and performance. His inspiring journey from survival to success, including overcoming bile duct cancer and a life-saving liver transplant, makes him not only relatable, but unforgettable. Today, Matt equips leaders and teams with practical tools to turn financial stress into strength, fueling individual well-being and better business outcomes. Matt, welcome to Don't Retire, Graduate.
Thanks so much, Eric. I'm grateful to be here.
Your story is so compelling that I don't want to waste any time in getting to it. So if you can share a little bit about some of your history, homeless to self-made millionaire is not something we hear every day. And the fact that you're bringing wellness to other families and other people is totally inspiring. We'll get to some of the professional work toward the end of the show, but why don't you share that experience with us? We'll try and put ourselves in your shoes to the extent we can for a moment or two.
I'd love to. I think one area that I'd like just to tweak a little bit is the idea of self-made millionaire. There are so many mentors, so many teachers, so many advisors throughout my journey that helped me to become who I am today. And I'd be remiss without saying that. So self-made, I'm not. There've been many along the journey, and for that, I'm grateful. So as you mentioned in the intro, Eric, there's so much in my history of overcoming. And I like to think of it as pain to purpose. And the pain was significant, much of it self-inflicted. So without too many details and going into all of that, as a teenager, I got heavy into drugs and alcohol. As a sophomore in high school, I ended up moving out of my family's house, sold drugs for a living, overdosed while still in high school, was actually at the school. The school nurse called 911. Through all of that, there's so many stories, so much challenge, and ultimately was something that really forged who I am in a lot of ways. I pause and even just to find the words because there's so much in there. There's so much pain. There's so much challenge. And as a result, also so much gratitude because I've survived. So I knew that I needed to change. I grew up in Connecticut through all of those challenges, moved to Massachusetts looking for change because the house where I was living was raided by the police frequently. And our teenage friends were stopped after trying to attend parties or just visit after school. And for anyone, maybe you can't necessarily relate to the extreme nature that I took drugs and alcohol. Maybe you've never even tried drugs and alcohol or had a problem with them. But maybe you've had a challenge that you've wanted to completely change your life, to find some sort of new beginning. For myself, when I moved to Massachusetts, I found that when I moved, I took all my baggage with me. I was still me. I couldn't leave that behind. And maybe you've tried to change location. Maybe you've tried to change some significant things, get some significant help. My message today is one of hope. There is always hope, and never give up. If you feel as a listener now that you're overwhelmed by life, regardless of your stage, maybe it's kids that you have that now are getting into their own troubles and bringing up memories for you, whether of your past or new experiences altogether and new challenges. There's always hope. I have a 15-year-old now, and we're working through some significant challenges as well. So I know what it's like to work through challenges at different ages and stages. There's always hope. So I moved to Massachusetts to get away from that. And by grace, a friend reached out invited me to play. In my past, I was a professional musician, congas, bongas, djembe, all the percussive fun stuff, and played with amazing band, Best of Boston band. And he invited me out to this Bible-based drug recovery program. And I was like, thanks, I'm good. That's not for me. But he persevered because he saw a better future for me, even when I didn't necessarily see it for my life. And eventually did get into the Bible, got into this drug recovery program. And by grace, since 1999, I've been sober. And that has made all the difference. Professionally, personally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, all of the above. That has made all the difference for me in my life. And I'm grateful to Eric Jones for reaching out, for persevering, for seeing a hope and a future when I didn't see it for my own life. Because when we lack hope for a better future, we tend not to make the best choices in our present moment, in our current life situations.
That is, that's a lot. That's intense. And, I have a teenager also, and am, both proud of her for making good decisions and terrified of some of the ones that are out there to be made, some of which are life-changing in an instant. And it sounds like you went through a really incredibly dark period. I assume that it was a lonely period, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the intersection of addiction and hopelessness and maybe mental illness, which I think come together a little bit. And that's defined so many different ways. I don't mean it to be derogatory in any way. I just think there's things that drugs and alcohol can affect our brains, and so can helplessness and the lack of hope. So the fact that you discovered that was incredibly important. And this is a message a lot of people, whether they're teenagers today, who most of our listeners are not teenagers. Most of them are parents and grandparents of teenagers, though. And therefore, I think this is a message of, definitely a message of hope. So addiction is something you battle with your whole life. I mean, you're 26 plus years sober, which is amazing. Congratulations. That is a hard thing to do. How involved are you now with any type of recovery programs for others, or are you still involved in some of the Bible programs and the recovery programs today, or have you almost entirely moved on from that? Because I understand it can be a real lifetime commitment.
It is a lifetime commitment, and people in my life are ones who I'm eternally grateful for, because they continue to help me even when I might necessarily make the best choices. They're there to remind me, dude, what are you doing? Sometimes I need some quote unquote tough love, and the importance of speaking the truth in love is critical. Sometimes as a dad, I want to give my son a quick, swift kick in the pants. And sometimes we need that extrinsic motivation, not the kick in the pants, but the love that's spoken in truth. Too often, I want to, as a people pleaser, sugarcoat the truth, be able to just continue to say everything will be okay, everything will turn out right, regardless of consequences for particular actions. And we can't say that with certainty. There are consequences to our actions. So when you mention the importance of mental health, we see it dominating headlines today as we record, last year before our recording, and I'm quite certain, unfortunately, next year as well, there will be headlines about the challenges of mental well-being. Part of that is challenges to access competent care at all different ages. I mean, as we think about not retiring, but graduating to what is the question that you continue to speak about, to answer for so many. And mental health in later years is significant. My wife and I are caregivers. Her dad unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but our plan came to fruition because he was able to do so in the addition that we built for him. Her mom, we continue to work through mental health challenges. She's otherwise physically healthy. She's 80 years old, but her mind is not just her mind, but everybody's mind is incredibly powerful. The importance of a positive mindset through all life ages and stages, whether as a teen for our kids and grandkids, as you mentioned, for listeners, Eric, for ourselves, and maybe even for others who are in our care. is critical. So mental health is a huge topic, certainly more than we have to cover it in this time. But you asked the question specifically about addiction. For me, it is a lifelong pursuit of working towards sobriety, because it's not just chemical recovery, it's character recovery. It's recovering parts of my childhood that I tossed away, some by decision, mental health, deep depression, suicidal ideation and attempts. There's a lot in those years. But when we talk about addiction, again, maybe listeners can't necessarily relate to deep clinical depression or alcoholism or drug addiction. But some psychologists estimate that 100% of the population at one time or another are encumbered by some particular type of addiction. And there's process addictions. For my 25 years in credit counseling, and now I serve on a board of one of the Forbes #1 credit counseling agency in the country, we see every day addiction to debt, addiction to spending, addiction to gambling. And there's Debtors Anonymous, Spenders Anonymous. They're vitally important because it's not just about the dollars and cents. It's not just about the money. It really is about the character, about the mental well-being, about building whole health wealth, thinking about all the different domains of well-being in our lives so that an area isn't left behind. And when we talk about mental well-being and health, it certainly is tied to financial well-being, because it takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of time. Sometimes it leads to loss of employment or loss of jobs, or you can fill in the blank. Maybe as a listener, you've felt or experienced some of those challenges. And I'm with you. And it's hard. But again, there's always hope.
So, first of all, strong, incredible message, and you're 100% right. Whether you've dealt with the chemical addiction or not, there's lots of addictive personalities, and people have issues with food, they have issues with substances, they have issues with spending. You're absolutely right that credit is bad credit is a noose around your neck that people just keep tightening and tightening, and it's very scary. So I'm glad to hear you're involved with that. I want to shift a little bit to talk about some of the work you're doing in financial wellness. We've made financial wellness a priority at BFG and within our organization, because we realize that any form of wellness is a step in the right direction. You talk about it being a journey. There's lots of kinds of wellness. And for us as professionals, whether it's from a consulting standpoint, an advising standpoint, or just a volunteering and human standpoint, helping other people find wellness in your lane where you excel. I can't help somebody with cardiac wellness, but I can help them with financial wellness. We all have our own strengths. So talk a little bit about that work and how the impact of financial wellness, financial literacy and education that hopefully lead to financial wellness, how that's transforming lives. Because I imagine you're seeing some incredible success stories as well as maybe some real challenges along the way.
It's so true. And there are many. I've estimated somewhere north of 100,000 different people that I've worked with. And each specific example is significantly different. The story that I'll share is one closest to my heart. And I shared this story of caregiving with my mother and father-in-law. My wife and I made the decision it was about 21 years ago, as they were getting to an age that were still fully self-sufficient, independent, living on their own, but the maintenance, the upkeep of their home was getting to be too much. Their daughters had grown, started their own families, and I was the emergency plumber and the emergency electrician and the person who they called for everything, in working a busy career and building a life with their daughter, my wife, who is amazing, incredible. Shout out, Elsa. It was challenging to move back and forth. They started to think about downsizing, getting a condo, moving into senior living, senior housing. And we made the decision to move them into our home. And we built an addition so that they'd still maintain independence, but we could be close, nearby. And it was a long-term plan. I think what I've seen too often in many different arenas is in the drive for instant gratification. I see that in my 15-year-old son to the extreme because it's always living for the moment. YOLO, you only live once. You can show I'm showing a little bit of my age by saying NOLO instead of YOLO. And he doesn't even say YOLO because that's probably several years behind us now.
Yeah.
But thinking beyond the quarter, the term, the day, the week, the month, the year, 5 years, even a decade is really important when we think about well-being. So there's the drawing near and drawing far. So the drawing near, we need to be well today. We need to do the things that build wellness for our future. And we need to be of stable, sound, clear minds today. And that's a balance because our present self, our future selves are constantly battling for what's most beneficial. For my wife and I, we thought in terms of decades. And even though, as I mentioned, my wife, her mom is incredibly healthy. My wife's grandmother is 100 years old. So to think that my mother-in-law could live for many more years is reasonable. That's still 2 more decades. And that's 2 more decades of encouraging her towards well-being. It's not just financial. We have an irrevocable trust. We have financial pieces in order. What she has struggled with is even finding that peace, wondering about all the what ifs. What if I have catastrophic illness? And we've seen it in our house. My father-in-law, who we cared for, had lung cancer. I had bile duct cancer. He succumbed being 80. I, by literally the grace of God, survived, had the liver transplant so that I could survive. But it's traumatic to the whole family. When we think about cancers and when we think about falls as we age, they become greater and greater risks to significant changes of life and reduction of mobility. Thinking of those long-term really is important because it's our homes in which we live. It's, again, not just the money, but thinking about money in a way as we age so that we can be unencumbered and really have joy. It's not necessarily the biggest pile of cash. She's okay financially. My wife and I cover all of her bills. She doesn't have a worry about food or utilities or any of that. However, the worry, the stress, the fear, the anxiety is still there. And that's the conversation that we continue to have because it's not an instant turnaround, but it's ongoing work with the perspective of time, of decades. On the flip side, on the younger end of the spectrum with our son, he's 15. We look back 10 years and we can see significant change. He's grown and matured in so many ways since he was 5 years old. There's research and data that shows we can look back in our own lives 10 years and see significant change and understand that that occurred, assessing where we are today. However, the study showed that envisioning the growth over future forward 10 years is very, very difficult for the majority of the population, majority of people. But it's critically important to have that vision because where vision is lacking, even nations fail. We need vision for our own lives. We need the idea that we can build a life full of purpose, of hope, of resilience, regardless of the amount of money, but with the mindset that no matter what comes, we take it one day at a time and continue to build and grow and live each day with purpose. As I mentioned, for me and my story, it's a story of pain to purpose, and purpose having the best of what I can give to others in service fulfills me in ways beyond imagination.
The point of getting older, I mean, obviously people say getting older is a privilege. It's also not for the meek, right? I mean, it's a tough thing to do. And in your mother-in-law situation, I imagine when you talk about the fact that there's still some financial anxiety, even though she doesn't have to worry for anything specifically financially, how much of that do you think, and I don't necessarily mean just in her case, but in general, how much do you think is about relinquishing self-reliance and self-independence and control and the things that, you're used to doing this. Nobody wants to have their keys taken away from them. That's their mobility. It's their, and I mean literally or figuratively. So how do we balance that? My folks are both living. In fact, as we record this, today is my mom's birthday. Happy birthday. Shout out to Mom.
Happy birthday.
There you go. My dad's 86. My mom is 79 today. Don't tell anyone I told her. But nonetheless, there is some concern about what's coming. I can't see what's in their next 5-10 years, and they can't, to your point. But there's a point where you have to, I think, in most cases, relinquish some level of independence or control, and clinging to as much of it as possible that stays reasonable, healthy, responsible, and all of that. That's a hard line to walk. And as the son or son-in-law that you and I both are in these various conversations in our lives, that is a hard line to walk. People are naturally really afraid to give up or lose independence. No one wants to feel that way.
It's so true, Eric. I agree with you 100%. Fear is a huge motivator, and often it's rooted deeply in our past. So as far as even that question, in psychology, there's the idea, if you think about the big red barn, that's all that you can think of, right? As soon as I said that to audiences, don't think of the big red barn. Don't even picture a big red barn. To any listener right now, there's a good chance you're picturing a big red barn.
I know I did. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
I did.
Sorry.
Instantly. No, it's fine. I did, though.
Fall
instantly.
is coming.
Yes.
Yeah. Fall is coming. I'm in New England. Big red barns are beautiful, especially with changing color of leaves. However, if all that we do is try not to worry, not to stress, not to have fear, and if all my mother-in-law here is don't be afraid, don't be scared, don't be anxious, all that she's going to do is have an increased level of anxiety, fear, worry. We'll speak in specifics with my mother-in-law is deeply rooted in her past and her development, even as a kid. She grew up in China. Her mom escaped mainland China with the World War invasion of Japan, literally with a child on her back, and went to Hong Kong. And from Hong Kong, eventually their family was able to get to the United States. And for my mother-in-law, she grew up going down to the stream to get water and wash clothes, and had to haul that on her shoulders to have water for cooking, and et cetera, et cetera. Scarcity was a way of their life. Survival mode is the mode that they lived in predominantly. And when we live in survival mode, it's difficult to see the future. It's difficult to think about well-being. We're so focused on just living another day. And that survival into ultimately abundance is a challenging journey and a different road for each person. For my mother-in-law, there's deep work that I can't do for her because it's rooted in some of that trauma that she experienced as a kid. And some of it's generational for her, not even believing that working on trauma is a thing. And for me, in my generation, we're sort of as a Gen Xer, we're on that cusp where it wasn't necessarily popular as a kid. There wasn't necessarily lots of help for my deep depression, even in high school. Now, certainly it's commonplace where there's performance psychologists, and mental well-being is pervasive throughout all areas of life, whether it's school, whether it's work and career, whether it's retirement planning or otherwise. It's important to go through those steps, that healing journey, because without it, it's thinking of the big red barn.
Is it possible the pendulum has swung too far? Because I agree with you. As a Gen Xer, we were latchkey. We let ourselves home, getting off the bus and all of the things. And now we have a generation of kids who aren't, it's not even, you've heard of Tiger Mom, right? And then you've heard of the helicopter parent who's sort of always surveying. But I think we've gone to concierge parent, which is a whole nother level. I think we have an entire generation of kids. And this is unfair to say because every young person has their own personal story, and not everyone's in a world of abundance. But for people where scarcity is not an issue, where survival is not an issue, it's called, and I use this tongue in cheek, it's called first world problems. But the fact of the matter is that I wonder if we've gone too far. If all of a sudden there is so much help, so much assistance, the safety net is so safe that risk becomes almost unacceptable. Any risk I'm not suggesting that we should put our kids on a high wire act or something with no net, but I wonder if we've gone too far. I wonder if there are too many types of those conversations. And I'm just curious because this is partly the world you and I are in, but is there some merit to that thought? Could I be onto something?
I think, as you said, the key is that it's an individual thing. And for each person, maybe it is too much. The tiger mom who's hovering over and super involved, or the concierge parent, as you say, who's super involved in a child who may not even need additional help. Is there a area that's too far that becomes limiting to that child's growth development? I would say yes, most definitely. For other kiddos, in the example of ours, there's a history of complex trauma through DCF involvement in adoption, where there's additional help that's necessary to really provide the best possible future. So as I was talking about my mother-in-law, and obviously she can't go back in time, and she's not able to live as a kid in today's world, her anxiety isn't rooted in lack. Her anxiety isn't rooted in inability to feed herself or the trauma of physically getting by. It's rooted in the mindset that has been developed and curated throughout her entire life. And I think that as far as the pendulum swinging one way or the other, I think that it's much more of an individual than global, universal aspect to what's best for us as an individual. And for each listener, you're in a different place. Maybe you grew up with extreme poverty. Maybe you grew up with childhood abuse. Those are heavy, serious things that, if not dealt with, will pop up in many ways. I've worked with a lot of different clients with some challenges in their past, with whether it's financial trauma, physical abuse, or otherwise, that affects them to this day. And oftentimes it leads to addictions, whether it's spending. It doesn't have to be drugs and alcohol like we spoke about earlier. But I've seen credit card debt mount. The most credit card debt I've seen one person have was $500,000 that I helped a gentleman work through. And six-figure credit card debt is commonplace. We have cumulatively in the country trillions of dollars of credit card debt. And as of this recording, in this past quarter, the delinquencies are increasing. So certainly there's a problem, and it's not just unemployment. It's not just inflation, though those are significant, and not to minimize those things, as there are families struggling with food insecurity and struggling to put food on the table. And for listeners, maybe that's you. Reach out and there's help. Maybe that's not you, and you have more than enough. You have an abundance. Then the message is to understand and realize that our neighbors, regardless of how affluent, I live in Metro West Boston, one of the most affluent areas per se in the country. There are people who go to sleep at night without food, whether it's elderly and senior citizens, whether it's kids trying to get up and go to school. And there's some school programs, and there's some things like Meals on Wheels and assistance that exists to provide food. But I mention that because each of us, our situation is different. And for some of us, for my wife and I, we are fortunate to have more than enough. And we found that it's incredibly fulfilling to get out and serve at a food pantry. We led a food pantry in the area for years and be part of the problem, per se, to grab a quote, to be the change that we want to see in the world. And as far as the balance, when we think about a pendulum swinging towards more, whether it's counseling, help, safety nets, or less, and helping to promote risk in a healthy kind of way, it really is an individual situation, because we are just so different in many ways as individuals. My wife and I are like polar opposites. I always joke, I obtained my GED. I was a high school dropout. Even though I got my GED, her opposite is she went to MIT. She's brilliant in so many different ways that I'm not. The power of our differences is that when we come together to look at a challenge, our solution when we work together is so much stronger. It's so much more complete and lasting than when we do it individually with our own strengths and weaknesses. So those individual strengths and weaknesses that we have, whether it's dealing with financial well-being, whether it's dealing with financial planning and thinking about retirement or graduating to a different area of life beyond our careers, thinking about those strengths and weaknesses in the people within our circle is incredibly powerful. And whether that circle includes professionals like psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, or others, or friends that we can confide in and trusted consiglieres, the people who we know have our best interests in mind as we work and grow together. I need those people in my life. I need the people who I can walk side by side in life, live with, purpose, and grow together.
Matt, I got to tell you, we could do about 6 more shows with what we've talked about here today. I would love to do a show on scarcity thought and sort of the impact that has on people financially. I'd love to do one on some of the various insecurities. And I feel like there's so much here. And we're running short on time. I'd like first to have you tell our listeners where they can get much more of you, because they're going to want more of you after this recording. How can folks get in touch with you, whether they're interested in your content, your books, or to have a consult with you?
My website, mattparadise.com, is the one simple place to go. You can find, whether it's LinkedIn, my book, other ways to reach out and connect. There's other resources that you can find that are on there as well. But mattparadise.com is a simple place.
We will put that in our show notes. And I can't let you off the hook without asking you what you want to be when you grow up, because you mentioned how hard it is to see 5 or 10 years in the future. But take us there for just a moment. What would you like to be when you grow up?
As a Gen Xer, I'm a Toys R Us kid. And for those who might not be familiar with the tagline, I don't want to grow up. I don't want to grow up. And what I mean by that more specifically is I want to continue to have the curiosity of a young child, one who explores the world with new, fresh eyes every day, absorbs things like sponges, and is excited to hop out of bed to live with purpose, intention, and excitement. And to live with that mindset with the resources and maturity of an adult is something that I want to continue to hold on to.
That's an awesome answer and a great idea. I will tell you that I've frequently told my daughter not to adult because it's a trap. And moreover, you had me, visualizing a big red barn, and now I'm picturing Jeffrey the giraffe. So thanks for doing that. And I hear the jingle in my head because I was also, and probably still am, a Toys R Us kid. Matt, thank you for being a guest on the show. This was awesome. And I know folks are going to be really excited to learn more about you and to look up some of your resources. So thanks for being here.
It really has been my pleasure. Thank you, Eric, for your content and helping people not to retire, but to graduate. I appreciate you.
I'd like to thank all of you for listening and watching today. If you enjoy our show, please be sure to share it with friends and family. Don't keep us a secret. They can join you on your path to financial freedom. And please take a moment to leave a review and a rating on your favorite podcast platform. Those are priceless to us. We'll be back next week with another installment in our Diary of a Financial Advisor, and in 2 weeks with another engaging guest. For now, this is your host, Eric Brotman, reminding you, don't retire, graduate.
Securities offered through Kestra Investment Services, LLC, Kestra IS, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Kestra Advisory Services, LLC, Kestra AS, an affiliate of Kestra IS. Kestra IS or Kestra AS are not affiliated with Brotman Financial or any other entity discussed.